Welcome to the Marketing Behind Rapid Growth, the podcast where we explore the strategies, decisions, and growth engines behind some of the world's most successful technology companies. Today, we're talking about Databricks. Picture a boardroom in 2015. The whiteboards are covered in architecture diagrams. The engineers in the room built one of the most beloved pieces of open-source software on the planet. Downloads are climbing. Conferences are sold out. Developers everywhere know the name. And yet, revenue is stuck at a few $1 million a year. The cloud giants are quietly making money off the very technology this team invented, and the team gets none of it. Funding is tightening, and the CEO is seriously considering walking away, going back to academia, and letting this become just another story about a brilliant idea that never turned into a business. That company was Databricks. And this is the story of how it didn't just survive that moment. It rewrote the rules of enterprise software marketing to become one of the most valuable private companies on earth. Let's start with where the story really begins. Not with a product, but with a problem in the market itself. By the late 2000s, enterprise data had split into two rival camps. On one side, data lakes. Cheap, massive, great for raw, messy data. Beloved by data scientists, but hard to govern, hard to query, hard to trust. On the other side, data warehouses. Structured, reliable, perfect for business intelligence, but expensive, rigid, and completely unsuited to the kind of unstructured data that machine learning needed. So companies did what companies do when neither option is enough. They bought both. They stitched together brittle, expensive pipelines, duplicating data across disconnected systems, hoping nothing would break. Databricks looked at that mess and saw an opportunity most companies would have been too cautious to take. Here's the strategic insight worth sitting with. Databricks realized that simply being the best version of Spark, the open source project it was built on, was never going to be a business. The open source community was fueling awareness, sure, but it was also, in a very real sense, the company's biggest competitor. Anyone could download Spark for free, so Databricks made a bold, almost contrarian decision. Instead of retreating into its lane, it marched directly into the territory of its most established rivals. It began building data warehouse capabilities directly on top of the data lake. The result was Delta Lake, a storage layer that brought database-grade reliability to raw cloud storage. Underneath that technical move was a bet about where the entire market was heading. Data science and business intelligence were converging. Companies wouldn't want two separate worlds forever. They'd want one environment that worked for the Python writing engineer and the SQL writing analyst alike. The product had evolved. But a better product, on its own, doesn't win a market. The next chapter of this story is about something that mattered just as much as the engineering. It's about language. Databricks initially tried to describe what it had built as unified data analytics. It was accurate. It was also completely forgettable. Nobody repeats that phrase at a dinner party, let alone to a procurement committee. So the founders, alongside CMO Rick Schultz, went back to the drawing board. And this wasn't a project handed off to a branding agency. The founders themselves stayed deeply involved. In one focus group, CEO Aligozzi reportedly grew visibly frustrated watching prospects fail to understand what the company had actually built. But instead of giving up, the team kept refining. And eventually, they landed on two words that would change the trajectory of the company. Data lakehouse. A blend of data lake and data warehouse. Provocative? A little strange the first time you hear it, but instantly legible. It told you exactly what it meant the moment you heard it. Two worlds merging into one. Here's what made this more than just clever wordplay. Databricks hadn't invented a term out of nowhere and hoped it would stick. For months beforehand, it had been publishing content about the cost and the pain of maintaining separate data silos. It was planting the problem in the market's mind before it ever offered the solution. So when the lakehouse concept arrived, it didn't feel like a sales pitch. It felt like the obvious answer to a frustration people already had. Not everyone welcomed it. Legacy database pioneers and major analyst firms initially dismissed the lakehouse as marketing fluff, a rebrand dressed up as innovation. Most companies faced with that kind of pushback would have softened the message or quietly moved on to something else. Databricks did the opposite. Rick Schultz has a name for what they did next: message stamina. They doubled down. They engaged critics directly instead of avoiding them. They repeated the lakehouse story across white papers, technical blog posts, a global speaking tour, and they activated the open source developer community as evangelists carrying the message outward. There's a piece of enterprise marketing wisdom behind this, and it's worth stating plainly. In B2B, a buyer often needs to hear a message 7 to 9 times before it actually sinks in. Most marketing teams get exhausted by their own message long before the market has absorbed it. Databricks didn't blink. And then came the moment every category creator hopes for but can't force. Major customers, including Capital One, started publicly describing their own lakehouse strategies. Once buyers were using the word themselves, the battle was over. Competitors, whether they liked it or not, now had to respond on a battlefield that Databricks had named. That's the real power of category creation. You're not just describing your product anymore. You're setting the terms everyone else has to argue on. Now, none of this worked in isolation. Underneath the big category story was a much more disciplined, almost quiet demand engine. In its early scaling years, Databricks made a deliberate choice to look past the C-suite. It didn't lead with the CIO. It targeted the people actually touching the data scientists, data engineers, and their direct managers, betting that technical believers would pull the organization along behind them. Open source engagement wasn't just goodwill, it was strategy. Activity across projects like Spark and MLflow fed intent scoring models, which let the enterprise sales team focus their energy on accounts that were already showing real interest. The community wasn't just a marketing channel, it was a lead generation system. That same instinct shaped partnerships. A landmark deal made Azure Databricks a first-party service inside Microsoft's cloud, instantly putting tens of thousands of Microsoft sellers to work distributing Databricks alongside their own products. That's not a small thing. That's an entire external sales force effectively aligned with your growth. Then generative AI arrived, and the ground shifted again. Despite having deep roots in machine learning, Databricks faced a real risk. In the public imagination, the ChatGPT moment threatened to make it look like yesterday's technology company, even though its foundations were built for exactly this future. Once again, product and marketing moved together. On the product side, Databricks acquired Mosaic ML in 2023 for roughly $1.3 billion, gaining the infrastructure to train and serve large language models. It later expanded further with offerings like AgentBricks and an operational database called Lakebase. On the marketing side, the lakehouse story evolved into something bigger, the data intelligence platform. And the messaging sharpened around a very specific enterprise fear. Companies were nervous about handing their proprietary data over to closed AI models they didn't control. Databricks leaned directly into that anxiety with a simple, resonant idea: your data, your AI. It positioned itself as the secure, pragmatic choice for companies that wanted powerful, custom models built on their own information, backed by proof points from major brands like Shell and Comcast. So what does this story actually teach us about growth? First, category creation is both a shield and a sword. By naming the lakehouse, Databricks wasn't just describing its product. It was quietly redefining the traditional data warehouse as an outdated approach. When you define the category, you become its default leader. Second, message stamina beats market resistance. Marketing teams almost always grow tired of their own message before the market has fully absorbed it. Databricks took real criticism for the lakehouse concept and kept repeating it anyway, backed by technical proof and customer stories, until the industry adopted its language as standard. Third, win the practitioner before you win the executive. Chasing the CIO too early in complex technical markets is often a vanity move. Databricks built its momentum from the ground up, treating developer relations not as a side function, but as a core part of marketing, turning technical champions into internal advocates. Fourth, open source is the top of the funnel, not the business model. Download numbers are not revenue. Databricks understood that distinction early, and instead of chasing free adoption for its own sake, it used community engagement as a signal, a way to identify who was ready for a real high-touch enterprise conversation. Databricks' story is often told as a triumph of engineering, the team behind Apache Spark building something the world couldn't ignore. And that talent was real, but brilliant code alone nearly wasn't enough in 2015. What saved the company, and eventually made it one of the most valuable private companies in the world, was the recognition that a great product needs a great story wrapped around it. Databricks didn't just build better infrastructure, It built a new way for the market to think about its own data problems. And once the market started speaking that language, Databricks was already standing at the front of the room. This was the marketing behind rapid growth. See you in the next episode.